Hello there, and welcome to Deep Earth Stories. If you're fascinated by the sleep bedtime mysteries, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're joining us from today. Drop a comment and tell me which part of the world you're listening from and what time it is over there. Tonight, we're going to explore a question that can sit quietly in the back of your head for years before suddenly demanding your full attention. It's not a question with a clear answer. It's not even one everyone would want to think about for long, but it can make you tilt your head and see everything from a different angle. The question is simple enough to say out loud. What if Earth was a test? Not a figure of speech, not a clever metaphor, a real test, the kind that is set up on purpose, the kind that has an observer, the kind where your choices, your struggles, and the way you live might actually be recorded, reviewed, and evaluated. Maybe it's a higher intelligence that designed it. Maybe it's an ancient power we used to call gods. Maybe it's an alien civilization from somewhere so far away we'd never noticed them. Or maybe, and this is where it gets stranger, it's us. Future humans reaching back through time, setting the stage for their own ancestors, and watching how the story plays out. You might have felt flashes of this before, even if you didn't name it. Times when life feels strangely staged, when things line up a little too neatly, when someone enters your life at the exact moment you need them. Before we wander too far, I'd like to ask you something smaller. Where in the world are you listening from right now? Is it daytime or night? Are you winding down or starting fresh? Your version of now might be bright with morning light, or wrapped in shadows and quiet. And now that we've set the pace, let's walk through this idea together. Because thinking about Earth as a test isn't about finding an answer quickly. It's about noticing what changes in the way you see things when you keep that question in the background. The word test doesn't always mean the same thing to everyone. In school, it meant rows of desks, a sheet of paper with small boxes to fill, a clock on the wall making each second feel heavier. In life, a test can be much more. A measure of what you've learned without realizing you were learning it. A way to see how you react under pressure, or how you behave when no one is telling you what to do. In this thought experiment, Thunder Earth as a test doesn't mean we're all sitting in the same room taking the same questions. It could mean each person is facing their own unique version, tailored in ways they don't even notice. If this is a test, what are the questions? Are they about survival? Whether we can adapt to changing climates, natural disasters, the endless list of diseases that try to take us down. Are they about morality? How we treat each other when resources are scarce or when we have too much? Are they about cooperation? Whether we can work together despite differences in language, culture, and belief? Maybe they're about something we haven't even considered. Some hidden variable that is the real point of all this. You might already be thinking about the conditions that make life possible here. The strange balance of factors that let us exist at all. Earth is neither too close to the sun nor too far. It has the right mix of elements, the right atmosphere, the right protection from radiation. Its magnetic field shields us from solar winds that could strip the planet bare. Its orbit is stable. Its seasons are predictable enough to let life plan ahead. Scientists call this the Goldilocks zone, just right for life as we know it. But if Earth is a test, these conditions might not be lucky accidents. They might be the carefully chosen settings of an exam designed to see what life would do if given the perfect starting ground. The tilt of the planet's axis, roughly 23.5 degrees, gives us seasons. Not too extreme, not absent entirely. Seasons require life to adapt, to plan, to change behaviours. They introduce a predictable but challenging pattern. The moon is unusually large relative to Earth, creating tides that stir the oceans without flooding continents. It stabilises our rotation, preventing chaotic wobbles. In a test, long-term stability combined with manageable short-term challenges is exactly what you'd want. Our atmosphere is thick enough to shield us from meteors and radiation, yet thin enough to let in sunlight. It holds the right mix of gases, mostly nitrogen and oxygen, with just enough carbon dioxide to regulate temperature. If the air were much different, we wouldn't be here. Even the dangerous aspects start to look deliberate. Hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts, volcanic eruptions cause immense suffering, but they also force adaptation. They push societies to develop technology, cooperation, and long-term planning. A perfectly safe, unchanging world might be comfortable, but it wouldn't reveal much about how life responds to pressure. When scientists talk about the improbability of life emerging here, they mention the sheer number of factors that had to align. Dozens of them. Some people call this fine-tuning. Others call it the anthropic principle. The idea that we can only observe a universe that allows for our existence. But if you lean into the test scenario, that fine-tuning is simply the setup. The experiment begins with an environment where success is possible but not guaranteed. If the planet itself feels like a stage that's been set, the next thing to notice is that life here doesn't happen without rules. We may not remember agreeing to them. We may not even fully understand them, but they're there, shaping everything we do. The most unavoidable one is simple. Time moves forward. No matter what you do, you can't slow it, pause it, or reverse it. Every choice you make locks in the path behind you and reshapes the one ahead. In a test, that's one of the most effective rules of all. If you can't see the outcome in advance, you have to decide based on the information you have now. Then there's physical vulnerability. Bodies need food, water, rest. They're subject to injury and illness. They wear out. No one gets to opt out. In a test scenario, this ensures survival is never automatic. It has to be earned day after day. Pain is another built-in rule. It signals that something is wrong, but it's also a teacher. Pain changes behavior. It pushes you to avoid certain actions and seek solutions. Without it, there's no immediate feedback for bad choices. With it, there's constant data about how we respond to difficulty. Loss is everywhere. Nothing and no one here is permanent. People, possessions, opportunities, all can disappear, sometimes without warning. In a test, that could be intentional, a way to see how participants handle change they can't prevent. Do they cling to what's gone, adapt to what's left, or build something new? Resources are limited. There isn't enough of everything for everyone to have as much as they want. That scarcity forces decisions. Do you share or take more? Compete or cooperate? Hoard out of fear or trust that you'll get what you need? And the rules aren't the same for everyone. We're not all born in the same circumstances. Some start with wealth, health, safety. Others start with poverty, illness, danger. From one point of view, that seems unfair. From another, it's a way to measure different variables. How do people respond when they begin with an advantage? How do they respond at a disadvantage? The variation in starting positions creates a wide range of possible responses. In a test, that's exactly what you'd want. If you go looking for the earliest ideas about why we're here, you don't find equations or lab notes. You find stories, passed down by memory long before writing, carved into stone, painted on cave walls, spoken around fires, whispered in temples. People were trying to explain life in terms that made sense to them, and over across different places and times you find the same thread. Life is a kind of trial. In ancient Egypt, the weighing of the heart. After death, your heart was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you entered the afterlife. If it was heavier, it was devoured. What you did in life determined what happened after. In ancient Greece, philosophers framed life as a proving ground for the soul. Plato spoke of the immortal soul being tested through earthly experiences, learning and refining itself through each lifetime. In ancient China, Confucianism emphasized life, as continuous self-cultivation, an ongoing assessment of moral character. Your behaviour in family, community and governance was a measure of who you were. Indigenous traditions in the Americas, Africa and Oceania speak of journeys, trials and lessons. Hardships are understood as essential experiences that prepare the spirit. Religions built on written scripture are even more explicit. Islam describes life as a trial from God. Christianity speaks of being judged at the end of life. Hinduism describes the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth as a series of lessons, with karma as both the record and the mechanism of the test. What's fascinating is how these ideas persist across cultures and time periods. The specifics vary: who's administering the test, what's being measured, what the rewards and punishments look like, but the core remains: life isn't random. It's a process with stakes. How you act matters, and there's something keeping track. If the idea of life as a test has been with us for as long as we've been telling stories, then the next step is to wonder who, if anyone, might be administering it. The oldest and most familiar answer is the divine, a creator or group of creators whose power is beyond our comprehension. In that version, everything we see is their work and every moment of our lives is known to them. For those who believe this, being observed isn't unsettling, it's reassuring. It means there's a purpose, and no act, good or bad, goes unnoticed. Then there's the extraterrestrial possibility. Somewhere out in the galaxy, there could be a civilization so advanced that our entire planet is just one of countless projects they monitor. To them, Earth could be a controlled environment, like a nature reserve or a long-running field study. We might not be much different from wildlife researchers tracking animals. It's also possible to think of the Watchers as future humans. If time travel or advanced simulation technology ever becomes real, our descendants could look back at this period and decide to recreate it, not as entertainment, but as a study. We might be living inside a reconstruction of Earth's past, every detail recreated from historical records, every person simulated with enough complexity to behave as if they were real. That brings us to the simulation hypothesis, the notion that our entire world could be a highly detailed computer-generated environment run by an intelligence outside it. If that's the case, the observers aren't just watching from a distance, they're in complete control of the environment's rules. Whoever they are, they've been careful. They haven't landed on the White House lawn or appeared in the middle of a crowded stadium. They haven't broadcast a clear message in every language explaining the rules and goals. If they're watching, they're doing it in a way that leaves us guessing, and maybe that's intentional. In any experiment, if the subjects know exactly what's being studied, their behaviour changes. Keeping the observers hidden might be the only way to get unfiltered results. If you imagine the Watchers looking down on Earth through the centuries, what they've been observing isn't a static experiment. It's a classroom that keeps rearranging itself. The students change, the lessons change, the tools change, but the learning never stops. Civilization, in that sense, isn't just the backdrop for the test. It's one of the main testing instruments. It shapes the questions we face, the problems we have to solve, the ways we interact. Small, scattered groups can only face certain challenges. They test individual skill, survival instincts, and cooperation in small numbers. Bring those groups into villages, then towns, then cities, and you create new problems, scarcity on a larger scale, disputes between strangers, the need for shared rules that go beyond blood ties. As our societies have grown, so has the complexity. Instead of finding food for your family, you're figuring out how to feed millions. Instead of settling disagreements with your neighbour directly, you're navigating legal systems, political structures, cultural norms. Civilization forces us into a permanent group project. You can't opt out entirely. Even if you live alone in the wilderness, you're still affected by decisions made far away. This interconnectedness creates conditions you can't fully control, another hallmark of a well-designed test. How you respond when other people's actions affect your life says a lot about your adaptability, resourcefulness, and priorities. And civilizations also produce art, philosophy, science, and culture, all of which could be part of the evaluation. How does a species express itself when it's safe enough to do more than survive? What kinds of ideas do they value? Do they use knowledge to improve life for everyone or to create advantages for a few? One of the most revealing aspects of civilization is how it handles change. Some societies adapt quickly to new ideas and technologies. Others resist until they're forced to shift. The process shows what values are truly important and how much a society is willing to risk to preserve or abandon them. If civilization is the classroom, then suffering is one of its most persistent and unavoidable lessons. No matter where you live, no matter what systems are in place, suffering keeps showing up. It's not evenly distributed. It's not predictable, and it's not something anyone volunteers for. Yet it's everywhere, woven into the fabric of human experience so tightly that you can't imagine a version of life without it. And if this is a test, suffering might be one of the central questions on the exam, not just the obvious physical forms, illness, injury, hunger, loss of shelter, but the quieter kinds too. Loneliness, fear, guilt, uncertainty, regret over something you can't undo, the slow erosion of hope when a problem doesn't seem to have a solution. These kinds of pain don't leave visible scars, but they shape lives just as deeply. From the perspective of an observer, these different forms of suffering could be like different test modules, each designed to measure a specific quality: resilience, empathy, adaptability, or perhaps something we don't have a name for yet. The unsettling thing is that if this environment was deliberately designed, suffering could be there by choice, not by accident. Most of us are used to thinking of suffering as something to eliminate. In medicine, technology, politics, much of human effort has gone into reducing pain and hardship. But in a testing framework, removing suffering entirely could defeat the purpose. It would be like giving a math exam without any problems to solve. If the goal is to see how we respond, the challenge has to remain. There are patterns to suffering that make it seem even more deliberate. It often comes without warning, forcing us to adapt quickly. It doesn't always strike in proportion to a person's actions. Sometimes good people face terrible hardship, while those who cause harm seem untouched. In human terms, this feels unfair. In testing terms, it could be intentional, an opportunity to see how people react when the world doesn't match their sense of justice. Do they become bitter? Do they work harder to create fairness for others? Do they lose faith in the idea of purpose altogether? Suffering also has a way of creating crossroads. A crisis can break someone down, but it can also push them to discover strengths they didn't know they had. It can turn strangers into allies, change the direction of a life, or spark a movement that affects thousands. From the outside, these moments could be exactly the kind of turning points an observer would want to study. The same event could lead one person to despair and another to transformation. The difference between the two might say more about human nature than any easy victory ever could. One of the hardest aspects to accept is how often suffering is caused by other people. Violence, exploitation, neglect. These aren't the work of an uncaring universe, but of human choices. If Earth is a test, this could be one of the most important parts of it. Seeing how we treat each other when given the ability to cause harm or prevent it. Every act of cruelty and every act of kindness becomes part of the record. The contrast between the two might be what the test is really about. That's where empathy comes in. And empathy itself might be one of the most difficult things to measure without suffering. It's easy to be kind when nothing is at stake. It's harder when you have something to lose, when helping someone else costs you time, resources, or safety. Suffering creates those moments, situations where helping is optional but costly. Do we step in anyway? Do we ignore it? Do we convince ourselves it's not our responsibility? From the outside, these decisions could be as revealing as any scientific measurement. There's also the strange way suffering can connect people who might otherwise never meet. A shared hardship can break down social barriers, at least temporarily. It can make enemies see each other as human, or bring together people from entirely different worlds. In those moments, suffering becomes the catalyst for cooperation, even if it's not the kind of cooperation anyone would wish for. But suffering doesn't guarantee unity. It can just as easily drive people apart, breeding resentment, mistrust, and selfishness. This dual nature, the potential to unite or divide, makes it a perfect variable to study. The question isn't just who survives, but how they survive, and what kind of person they become in the process. On a personal level, suffering forces constant choices about perspective. Do you see yourself as a victim of circumstance or as someone capable of shaping your response? Do you believe your pain has meaning, or do you see it as meaningless chaos? Those beliefs can influence every decision afterward, sometimes for a lifetime. If this is a test, the way we frame our own suffering might be just as important as the suffering itself. And then there's the question of meaning. Some people find ways to frame their suffering as part of a larger purpose, a spiritual journey, a test of faith, a contribution to a greater good. Others see it as meaningless and cruel, a flaw in the design of a life. Both views can shape behavior in powerful ways. If the observers are looking for variety in responses, this might be one of the richest areas of data. The same pain can lead one person to activism, another to isolation, another to cynicism, and another to forgiveness. When you step back far enough, far beyond the span of human history, suffering takes on an entirely different scale. It's not just the personal struggles of individuals or the challenges faced by a single civilization. It's the recurring pattern of life itself rising and falling, vanishing and returning in new forms. The planet has seen more endings than any of us can easily imagine, and just as many beginnings. If Earth is a test, these vast cycles might be the ultimate reset button, wiping the slate clean and seeing what emerges next. Most of the species that have ever existed are gone. The fossil record is a long archive of experiments that ended, some abruptly, some gradually. From the smallest organisms to the largest predators, extinction is the rule, not the exception. Sometimes it's a slow change in climate, the gradual shifting of continents, the steady alteration of ocean chemistry. Other times it's sudden, a massive volcanic eruption, an asteroid impact, a rapid shift in the atmosphere. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. Entire branches of the tree of life cut off, leaving space for something new to grow. If you imagine the watchers observing all this, it's easy to see the appeal. In one sweep, an extinction event tests adaptability on a massive scale. It forces survivors to navigate an entirely changed environment, to find new ways to live, to evolve into forms that fit the new conditions. From a testing perspective, these are rich data points, demonstrations of how life responds when the rules change overnight. The most famous example is the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs. For tens of millions of years they had ruled the land. Then in a geological instant they were gone. The survivors, small mammals, birds, reptiles, faced a world stripped of its old order. Some adapted, some didn't. Eventually one of those mammalian lineages would give rise to us. If you see Earth as a test, it's hard not to notice how that one reset cleared the way for our own existence. From a human perspective, these events are unimaginably distant. But in the scale of the test, they could be deliberate intervals, like clearing the desk between assignments. If the watchers want to see not just how life adapts to slow changes, but how it handles rapid, high-stakes transformations, extinction and renewal are the perfect tools. They strip away stability, remove the familiar, and leave only those who can improvise under pressure. It's not just about biology either. Even within human history, there are cycles that echo this pattern on a smaller scale. Civilizations rise, reach their peak, and then collapse, often leaving behind only ruins and stories. Sometimes they fall to external forces, invasions, plagues, natural disasters. Other times they crumble from within, undone by political instability, economic collapse, or environmental degradation. In the wake of these collapses, new societies emerge, often borrowing ideas from the old, but shaping them into something different. From the standpoint of a test, these cycles could serve a similar function to mass extinction events in nature. They test the resilience of systems, the ability of survivors to adapt, and the capacity for innovation under pressure. It's tempting to see these cycles as failures, as if each collapse means the participants didn't pass the test. But another way to see them is as part of the process. In many educational systems, failure isn't the end, it's a step toward mastery. You take the test, see where you went wrong, and try again. The collapse of a civilization might not be a final judgment, but a way of clearing the field for a different attempt. If that's the case, then renewal is just as important as extinction. The new systems that emerge aren't created in a vacuum. They're shaped by the memory of what came before. Even if knowledge is lost, traces remain in architecture, artifacts, and oral traditions. These remnants can guide future generations, offering warnings and inspiration. The interplay between extinction and renewal might be one of the most revealing aspects of life on Earth. Too much stability, and there's no pressure to adapt. Too much change, and there's no chance to build anything lasting. The balance between the two determines the pace and direction of development. In that balance, you can see a kind of rhythm. Long stretches of relative stability punctuated by sudden upheavals, each one reshaping the possibilities for what comes next. What if all of this isn't just part of a natural system, but part of an entirely artificial one? What if the world we live in, from the smallest detail in a grain of sand to the vast sweep of galaxies overhead, isn't fundamentally real in the way we assume, but a kind of constructed environment? The simulation hypothesis is deceptively simple. We might be living inside a simulation created by an intelligence outside our reality. That intelligence could be a highly advanced alien civilization, future humans with unimaginable computational power, or something we can't categorize at all. Inside the simulation, everything would feel real because it's built to. The physics are consistent, the history is detailed, the experiences are convincing. But outside it, there's a completely different level of reality, one we can't access, at least not directly. The unsettling part is that according to some thinkers, it might actually be more likely that we're in a simulation than not. The reasoning goes like this: if any civilization anywhere reaches the point where they can simulate conscious beings and detailed environments, they probably won't do it just once. They might run countless simulations for research, entertainment, or purposes we can't guess. If that's the case, the number of simulated worlds could vastly outnumber real ones, meaning that statistically, the odds of us being in the original physical reality could be extremely small. If you take this seriously, it offers a very different way to interpret the cycles of extinction and renewal we've seen throughout Earth's history. In a simulation, those could be programmed events, and large-scale environmental resets triggered by code designed to test how the inhabitants respond to sudden change. Each extinction event could be like hitting a reset switch on part of the simulation, clearing out certain parameters and introducing new variables to see what happens. From the perspective of the designers, This would be a controlled way to study adaptability over vast stretches of simulated time. The simulation hypothesis also offers an explanation for some of the stranger aspects of our universe. The way physical constants seem fine-tuned for life, for example. In physics, the values of certain fundamental properties like the strength of gravity or the mass of the electron seem oddly precise. If they were even slightly different, life as we know it wouldn't exist. In a simulation, this wouldn't have to be a coincidence. Those constants could be deliberately set by the programmers, just like a game designer sets the rules of their virtual world. And then there's the matter of glitches. In our technology, no system is perfect. Even highly advanced simulations could have small errors, moments when the environment doesn't behave exactly as intended. In human life, strange coincidences, impossible seeming patterns, or sudden changes in probability could be interpreted as these glitches, brief glimpses of the underlying code showing through. Most people dismiss such moments as chance, but in a simulation framework they take on a different weight. Of course, if we are in a simulation, the natural next question is why? The purposes could be as varied as the possible designers. If it's an advanced alien civilization, maybe they're studying the development of intelligent life under different conditions. If it's future humans, perhaps they're running simulations of their own history to understand it better, or to test scenarios before making decisions in their own time. It's even possible the simulation is entertainment, an elaborate form of storytelling or immersive experience for beings who find our struggles and triumphs worth watching. The idea also reframes the possibility of a test. In a physical world, the test might be a metaphor for life's challenges. In a simulation, it could be literal. The programmers could have built the environment with specific conditions and objectives to measure behavior. The cycles of extinction and renewal could be part of those objectives, as could the moral, social, and technological challenges we face. Every choice we make individually and collectively could be logged and analysed in real time. If the simulation idea holds any truth, or even if we set it aside and just consider the possibility that Earth is some kind of trial, then the most unnerving part might be that we don't actually know what's being tested. It's one thing to sit down for an exam when you've been told the subject and format. It's another to realise you might be taking a test every day without being told the questions, the scoring system, or even the criteria for passing. That possibility changes the way you look at ordinary life because suddenly everything becomes suspect. Every decision, every interaction, every impulse you either follow or resist, any of it could be part of an evaluation you're unaware of. The most effective tests in a controlled study are often the ones the participants don't know they're part of. When subjects are told exactly what's being measured, they change their behaviour, consciously or not, to try to match expectations. But if they believe they're doing something ordinary, filling out an unrelated survey, working on a neutral task, their genuine responses emerge. If Earth is a test, the same principle might apply on a planetary scale. The only way to see our unfiltered nature is to make the evaluation invisible. That means the real questions might not be written in the obvious places. They might be hiding inside the routines of everyday life. How you treat someone when you think there's nothing to gain. Whether you help a stranger when no one is watching. The way you behave when you have power over someone else and when they have power over you. These moments could be the equivalent of short answer questions scattered throughout the day, each one contributing to a larger pattern. The unsettling part is that you can't fake a pattern for long. Even if you're aware of being observed in some vague way, the details of your behaviour eventually reveal what you really prioritise. Do you only act fairly when there's a reward? Do you abandon principles under stress? Do you stay consistent even when it costs you? In a hidden test, those patterns might matter more than the occasional dramatic choice. It's not just individuals who could be tested this way. Entire societies might be subject to invisible evaluations. How a community responds to scarcity could be one question. Whether a nation upholds its ideals when it's inconvenient could be another. Global cooperation in the face of a shared threat could be a large-scale version of the same thing. From the point of view of an external observer, watching these situations unfold without announcing the stakes would reveal far more about our true nature than asking us directly. The problem is that if we don't know the questions, we also don't know the scope of the answers. A decision that feels small could have far-reaching implications in the structure of the test. Ignoring someone in need might be weighted differently if it happens in a time of abundance versus a time of crisis. Choosing to cooperate might be valued differently depending on the personal risk involved. The same action could be interpreted in opposite ways depending on context, and we'd have no way of knowing which was which. And then there's the possibility that some of the questions are built into long-term scenarios, the kind that take decades or even centuries to play out. Civilization's environmental policies, for example, might be a test of foresight and responsibility. The results wouldn't be visible until the consequences arrived, and by then most of the decision makers would be gone. In that kind of setup, the real subjects of the test aren't the individuals making the choices but the species as a whole. In a way, this also reframes some of history's biggest turning points, wars, revolutions, scientific breakthroughs. What if they weren't just random products of human ambition and error, but milestones in a long sequence of evaluations? Each one could be designed to see how we handle shifts in power, in the introduction of new knowledge or the disruption of established systems. Success and failure might not even be measured in terms we understand. From the outside, both could be valuable for understanding how a species like ours functions. One of the more unnerving implications is that if the test is hidden, there's no guarantee the criteria match our own sense of morality. We might believe we're doing well by our own standards, being kind, working hard, protecting those we care about, and still be failing according to some unseen metric. Maybe the test is about adaptability more than kindness, or maybe it values collective survival over individual achievement. Without the answer key, we're navigating blind, hoping our instincts align with the objectives, and yet that might be the point. A hidden test measures not just what we do when we know the rules, but how we act when we don't. Do we cling to personal values even without confirmation they're right? Do we adapt our behaviour in response to changing conditions or stay rigid and predictable? In an environment like this, the lack of feedback isn't a flaw. It's part of the mechanism. The uncertainty forces us to reveal what matters to us most because we can't tailor our actions to match the scoring system. If the watchers or the system we're inside are leaving signs in the sky and on the earth, then it's reasonable to think that noticing them isn't the end of the exercise. The real evaluation might begin when we decide what to do next. That's where morality becomes central. Not in the abstract philosophical sense that fills books and classrooms, but in the lived reality of decisions that have weight. The idea of a moral scorecard suggests there's a ledger somewhere, invisible to us, where every decision is recorded and interpreted against whatever framework the test uses. We don't know the categories, we don't know the weighting, and we don't know the passing grade. But if it exists, then every choice might count toward it. In human society, scorekeeping is nothing new. We measure performance in sports, academics, job evaluations. We track our own progress in exercise routines, diets, savings accounts. When we know the rules, these systems make sense. You can see what's expected, and you can measure your improvement. But the moral scorecard of a hidden test is different. It's opaque, running in the background whether we believe in it or not. We have to guess what it values. And those guesses are shaped by the culture, upbringing, and personal experience we carry with us. If the test is designed by beings or intelligences outside our reality, their sense of morality might not map perfectly onto ours. We might think of morality in terms of honesty, compassion, fairness, and responsibility. But the designers could have an entirely different metric, something that measures efficiency, adaptability, or long-term species survival instead. That doesn't mean our values are wrong. It just means they might not align with what's being scored. A decision we see as morally good might score low if it reduces adaptability. A decision we see as morally questionable might score high if it preserves the group over the individual. This mismatch creates a strange kind of uncertainty. Imagine you're in a game where you're not sure whether helping another player is considered a point in your favour or a strategic mistake. You'd have to rely on your own instincts, knowing full well that the system might be reading your actions differently. In a way, that's exactly where we are now. If the moral scorecard is real, we can only act according to the principles we believe are right, and accept that we might be evaluated by a different scale. It's possible that this uncertainty is intentional. If we knew exactly what actions would improve our score, we might simply optimize for that, performing goodness instead of living it. The hidden nature of the scorecard forces authenticity, or at least reveals it. When you can't see the scoreboard, you can't play to the crowd. You can only act from the values you actually hold, even if they're untested or unpopular. From a test design perspective, the real data might come from how we navigate moral ambiguity. Do we hold to a consistent principle, even when it costs us, or do we shift our stance depending on the situation? Do we act differently when we know someone is watching versus when we think we're alone? These are the kinds of variables that reveal what's deeply ingrained versus what's conditional performance. It also raises the question of scale. The scorecard might be individual, tracking each person separately, or collective, tracking humanity as a whole. If it's collective, then our individual actions contribute to a shared result, which means one person's choices could in theory be offset or outweighed by another's. This could explain why moral progress often feels uneven, and some groups advance in empathy and fairness while others regress, and the overall trajectory is a messy blend of both. Another layer to consider is whether the score is cumulative or weighted toward recent behaviour. In our own systems, some scorecards reset periodically, allowing for fresh starts, while others carry the full history of performance. If the watchers want to measure growth, they might value recent actions more heavily, treating past mistakes as less important if they're followed by improvement. On the other hand, if the point is consistency, the scorecard might track a lifetime of choices without ever clearing the record. The concept of a moral scorecard also reframes some of history's large-scale events: wars, famines, technological revolutions. Each could be seen as a massive set of moral tests. Who steps up to protect others and who exploits the chaos for personal gain? Who tells the truth in dangerous times and who spreads falsehoods? In moments of crisis, morality isn't theoretical. It's practical, immediate, and often costly. Those are the decisions that might weigh most heavily in the score. Free will sits at the heart of the idea that life can be evaluated. If we don't choose our actions, then it's hard to claim that our responses mean anything. And yet, the more you think about it, the more complicated it becomes to separate the choices we actively make from the conditions that shape them. The common assumption is that we act from our own desires, thoughts, and reasoning. But so much of what we do is influenced by things we didn't choose. The body we're born into, the time and place we live in, the family that raises us, the culture that surrounds us. These factors shape our instincts before we are even aware they exist. They set the stage for every decision, narrowing or expanding the possibilities we see as available. If Earth is a test, then free will might not be an all-or-nothing condition. It could be more like a spectrum, with each person's range of choices defined by circumstances they had no say in. That raises a problem for the idea of a fair evaluation. If one person is born into safety and abundance, and another into poverty and danger, can their actions really be compared on equal terms? The Watchers, if they exist, would have to account for this. They might measure us not against some universal standard, but against what we could reasonably do within our own situation. In that model, the test isn't about reaching the same outcome, but about how well we navigate the particular hand we've been dealt. It also opens up the possibility that part of the test is about whether we can expand our own range of choices. Humans have the rare ability to reflect on our instincts and override them, at least sometimes. We can notice when our culture has given us a biased view, or when our fears are pushing us toward a bad decision. We can learn from experiences that don't just affect our own lives, but also prepare us to act differently next time. From an outside perspective, the measure might not be which choice we make in the first place, but whether we're capable of altering our decisions as we grow. But then there's another layer. What if free will itself is an illusion, at least in the strictest sense? Neuroscience has shown that the brain can begin preparing for an action milliseconds before we consciously decide to take it. Some experiments suggest that what we think of as a conscious decision might actually be more like a post-event explanation, the brain acting first and the mind creating a story afterward about why we did it. If that's true, then the entire framework of moral responsibility becomes harder to define. If the Watchers are real and have control over the simulation, or even just over the conditions of the test, they could influence our decisions in ways we'd never detect. Slight changes to our environment, the sequence of events in a day, or even our emotional state could steer us toward one outcome or another. This wouldn't have to be dramatic. In human psychology experiments, tiny changes in framing or timing can have enormous effects on choices. In a controlled environment like this, the possibilities for subtle manipulation are endless. And yet, even with those constraints, people still surprise each other. Acts of unexpected kindness or cruelty, sudden bursts of creativity or destruction, moments when someone defies all predictions. These are the places where free will might be most visible, if it exists at all. If the test is designed to measure anything, it might be looking for those deviations, the times when someone steps outside what the system could have reasonably expected of them. There's also the question of how much free will matters to the purpose of the test. If the goal is to see how we react to certain conditions, then predictability might not be a flaw, it might be the data itself. In that sense, the illusion of free will could be enough, as long as we believe we're acting autonomously. From our perspective, that belief would still shape how we approach problems and relationships, which in turn shapes the outcomes that can be observed. But for us inside the system, the belief in free will has consequences beyond testing. It underpins our sense of responsibility, our laws, and our ethics. Without it, punishment and reward become harder to justify. If no one is truly responsible for their actions, then concepts like justice or even moral growth start to lose their meaning. So even if the designers knew free will was limited or non-existent, they might still want us to believe in it. That belief keeps our social structures functioning and keeps us engaged in the challenges we face. The real twist might be that free will isn't just something we either have or don't. It could be another variable in the test itself. Maybe part of the experiment is to see whether we can recognize the limits on our freedom and work to expand them. This could apply on both personal and collective levels. On the personal side, that might mean resisting destructive impulses, overcoming biases, or developing new habits. On the collective side, it could mean changing laws, dismantling unjust systems, or creating opportunities for more people to have meaningful choices in their lives. If there's a moral scorecard, and if our actions are being tracked towards some unseen threshold, then it's natural to wonder whether there's an end point. Not just the personal end point we all face when our lives are over, but a collective one. a moment when the test ends for humanity as a whole. In the framework, the idea of graduation becomes both tempting and unsettling. Tempting because it suggests there's a reward or advancement waiting if we succeed. Unsettling because it also means there could be a final judgment about whether we've made it or not. In human terms, graduation is a transition. It marks the completion of one stage and the readiness to enter another. You move from the controlled environment of the classroom into a broader, less guided space. If Earth is a test, then graduation could mean leaving this environment physically, spiritually, or in some way we can't yet imagine, for a new phase designed for those who've met the criteria. It could be a higher level of reality, a different kind of existence, or even a role reversal where we become the observers for someone else's test. The key question is what those criteria might be. If they're moral, then graduation could depend on reaching a certain level of empathy, fairness, or cooperation. If they're intellectual, it might require achieving a depth of understanding about the universe and our place in it. If they're about adaptability, then we might need to demonstrate that we can handle unpredictable changes without collapsing into chaos. It could also be a combination of all of these, measured not just in individuals but in the species as a whole. That last part is important because it would mean that no single person could graduate early. We'd rise or fall together. In that model, the most advanced among us wouldn't just be working toward their own score. They'd be trying to raise the collective average. They might do this by teaching, inspiring, or creating systems that allow more people to succeed. From the perspective of the test, the ability to bring others along might be the highest mark of readiness. It's possible that graduation isn't about perfection, but about meeting a minimum threshold. In schools, not every graduate leaves with the same level of skill or knowledge. The requirement is simply to be prepared enough to function in the next stage. If the watchers are running a test, they might have a similar standard. We don't need to be flawless, just capable of handling what comes next without destroying ourselves or others. That would allow for imperfection, mistakes, and diversity of thought, as long as the overall trajectory is upward. Graduation could also be more subtle than we imagine. It might not come with a clear announcement or a visible departure from Earth. It could be a shift in the nature of the test itself, moving us into a new set of challenges without telling us we've passed the first set. The graduation might be hidden, just like the test, to prevent us from relaxing or coasting. We might already be in the early stages of it without realizing. If the test has the possibility of graduation, then by definition, it must also have the possibility of failure. And unlike the graduation scenario, which is easy to imagine in hopeful, inspiring terms, the fail state is more elusive and more disturbing. Not just because it's negative, but because in the kind of test we seem to be in, failure wouldn't necessarily look like failure to those inside it. It might not be announced, it might not be obvious, and it might not even be recognized for what it is until long after it's happened, if at all. If Earth is a controlled environment, then the fail state could be any outcome that doesn't meet the purpose of the test, and that purpose could be much more specific than we assume. If the test is moral, failure might mean that we've proven ourselves incapable of reaching or sustaining a certain ethical standard. If it's about adaptability, failure could mean collapsing under environmental or social pressures we were supposed to survive. If it's about cooperation, failure could mean persistent division and self-destruction, even when unity is possible. The danger is that from the inside, these outcomes might feel like just another rough period in history, not the final stage of collapse. One unsettling possibility is that the fail state doesn't happen all at once. It might be a slow erosion of the qualities the test is measuring, like a steady decay that becomes normal over time. A little less empathy, a little less curiosity, a little less willingness to work together. Each small decline might be easy to justify or ignore until one day the system reaches a point where recovery is no longer possible. From the watcher's perspective, That moment would be the point of no return. From ours, it might look like business as usual. There's also the question of what failure triggers. In human experiments, when a test subject fails to meet the conditions, the experiment is often ended. In a simulation, that could mean shutting it down entirely. If Earth is a simulation, and the fail state might literally mean the end of this version of reality. The program could be wiped, reset, or archived for study. We wouldn't see it coming, and from our perspective, it could happen in an instant, lights out with no awareness afterward. Another option is that failure leads to a reset rather than complete erasure. The test could simply start over, perhaps with different conditions, to see if a new attempt produces a better outcome. If reincarnation is real, it could be part of this loop. The same individuals or consciousnesses being placed back into a reconfigured environment to try again. In that sense, failure might not be final, but it could mean losing any progress we've made, both collectively and personally. A more chilling possibility is that failure doesn't end the test at all, but shifts it into a different mode. Not one designed to measure potential for growth, but one designed to contain, control, or exploit what remains. If the Watchers have resources or data they can extract from us even in a failed state, they might keep us here, but with no chance of graduation. The environment could become more restrictive, more controlled, and more repetitive, designed not to challenge us toward improvement, but to keep us functioning at the level we've already proven we can't surpass. One of the hardest aspects of thinking about failure in this context is that it might be based on metrics we don't value or even know about. Imagine taking a test you think is about math, only to discover afterward that you are being graded on your handwriting. If the Watchers are measuring something we're not paying attention to, we could fail without ever realizing we were off track. That's especially concerning if the scoring criteria are tied to long-term patterns we don't monitor closely. And yet, some patterns might hint at how failure would look from the inside. If the test is about cooperation, the failed state could resemble a permanent fragmentation of our species, endless conflict, deep mistrust, and the inability to unite even in the face of shared threats. If it's about environmental stewardship, failure could look like the irreversible collapse of ecosystems, leading to a degraded, unstable planet that can't support the conditions needed for the test. If it's about adaptability, failure could be the point where we stop innovating, stop learning, and retreat into rigid, self-protective systems that resist change at all costs. The Watchers, if they're real, might have thresholds for each of these, lines we can't see but can cross without knowing it. Once crossed, the decision could be made instantly. There's no reason to believe they'd wait for us to recognize the problem before acting. They might even consider it more merciful to end the test without warning, sparing us the awareness of our own failure. But there's another possibility, that failure is visible, just not in the way we expect. Instead of a sudden event, it could manifest as a world that feels increasingly small, stagnant, and hopeless. Opportunities would shrink. Curiosity would fade. The sense that the future could be better would disappear. People might still live, work, and socialize, but without the spark of something larger driving them. In human terms, it would feel like drifting. But from the Watcher's perspective, it would be the end of forward motion, the collapse of the experiment's purpose. If the fail state is real, then perhaps the most important thing isn't to know exactly what it looks like, but to notice when we're moving toward it. That could mean watching for signs of narrowing possibility, for the loss of our willingness to take risks in pursuit of progress, for the replacement of hope with resignation. If those trends are visible, then the test might still be in play, and there might still be time to reverse course. Of course, the fail state might not be avoidable for everyone. If the test includes both individual and collective scoring, it's possible for some to pass while others fail, with outcomes diverging accordingly. That's where the moral scorecard ties back in. It might be that personal choices can't save the whole species, but they can save the individual from the consequences of collective failure. On the other hand, the reverse could be true. Even a perfect personal score might not matter if the group as a whole falls below the required threshold. From the inside, this is frustrating because it means we're operating without knowing whether to focus on our own performance, the collective outcome, or both. But from the perspective of a test designer, that uncertainty is part of the point. It forces us to care about both levels, to balance personal growth with collective responsibility, and to do so without the guarantee that either will pay off. If the possibility of failure is real, then it raises an even more subtle question. What if one of the things being measured isn't just our behaviour or our morality, but whether we can figure out that we're being measured at all? In other words, what if self-awareness isn't just a byproduct of the test, but one of its core requirements? This would change the way we interpret almost everything. It would mean that noticing the signs, questioning the setup, and even speculating about the purpose of life could be as important as the actions we take. It would mean that the very conversation about whether Earth might be a test could be part of passing it. In human-designed experiments, there's a distinction between subjects who are unaware of the experiment and those who are told in advance that they're part of one. The latter group often behaves differently, and is sometimes in ways that invalidate the results. That's why so many psychological studies rely on partial information, or outright concealment until the experiment is over. But there's also a more complex type of experiment, where the goal is to see if the participants can discover that they're in one without being told. In that setup, the discovery itself is the point. If Earth is such a setup, then the watchers might be waiting to see who notices. The signs we've talked about, the improbable fine-tuning of life's conditions, the moral patterns, the cycles of challenge and renewal, might not just be parts of the test but hints toward its existence. Noticing them would require a certain kind of awareness, the ability to step outside our immediate concerns and think about the structure we're inside rather than just the content of our lives. This raises the possibility that the test could have multiple tiers. The first is basic survival and adaptation, the level where most life operates. The second is social and moral complexity, the level where we begin to organize, cooperate, and create systems of meaning. The third and possibly final level could be meta-awareness, the recognition that we're inside a designed system. That recognition might be the gateway to the next stage, whatever it is. Self-awareness at that level isn't just about abstract speculation, it's about what you do with the realization. In human terms, if you were a subject in an experiment and you figured it out, you could react in different ways. You could try to break the experiment, you could try to play to its goals to ensure you pass, or you could engage with it more thoughtfully, and using the awareness to refine your behaviour while still respecting the framework. The watchers, if they're evaluating self-awareness, might be looking at which of those responses we choose, both individually and collectively. One challenge with this idea is that self-awareness isn't evenly distributed. In any group, some will see patterns sooner than others. This could create a split between those who suspect there's a test and those who think life is purely random. That split could be another part of the measurement. Do those who suspect share their insight, or do they keep it to themselves? Do they try to convince others, or do they respect the right of others to remain unaware? Each of those choices reveals something about values and priorities. It's also possible that self-awareness could be dangerous to the process if it spreads too quickly. If the point of the test is to see how we behave under the assumption that life is natural and unobserved, then widespread belief that we're being tested could alter the results. We might start behaving performatively, doing what we think the watchers want rather than acting according to our own developed principles. In that case, the watchers might prefer that awareness emerge slowly in pockets rather than all at once. This fits with the idea that not everyone is meant to pass in the same way. Some might excel at the moral or adaptive aspects without ever realizing the broader framework. Others might grasp the framework but struggle with the daily execution of the test's requirements. From the outside, both kinds of success might be valuable, just in different ways. The test could be designed to produce a range of outcomes rather than a single uniform result. The question then becomes, how does one demonstrate self-awareness without falling into the trap of artificial behaviour? The answer might lie in integrating the awareness into daily life without letting it override authenticity. That means continuing to act according to your values, but with an added layer of observation, watching not only what you do, but how it fits into the possible structure of the test. It's a delicate balance, and the ability to maintain it could be the real measure. From a historical perspective, moments of increased self-awareness have often coincided with major shifts in human civilization. The Enlightenment brought not just new knowledge, but a new way of thinking about knowledge itself. The space age forced us to see Earth as a single fragile sphere in a vast void, changing how we think about our place in the universe. The digital age has connected us in ways that make it possible to share patterns and anomalies instantly. Each of these could be steps toward collective self-awareness, milestones on a path that the watchers might be monitoring closely. Of course, there's also the possibility that we've been here before. If the test has been run multiple times, either on Earth or elsewhere, then the pattern of reaching self-awareness might be a known stage, one that comes with predictable risks and opportunities. In previous runs, perhaps civilizations reached this stage, and either used it to pass or misused it and failed. If so, the watchers could be watching us now with a particular kind of interest, knowing that this is a critical turning point. Self-awareness could also change the way we interpret challenges. If you believe life is random, a disaster might feel like bad luck. If you believe it's a test, the same disaster might feel like a deliberate obstacle. That shift in interpretation could influence how we respond, whether we give up, push harder, or look for the hidden lesson. The watchers might not care which interpretation we choose, only that we make one consciously, rather than reacting purely on instinct. If self-awareness is a stage of the exam, then one of the next questions is how that awareness interacts with the fact that we may be observed. Observation changes things. In science, it's recognized formally as the observer effect, the idea that measuring a system alters the system. In physics, the most famous example is the double-slit experiment, where the act of watching particles changes the way they behave. In human behavior, it's equally true. People act differently when they know they're being watched. Sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. That shift can work in both directions. For some, being observed sharpens performance. They stand straighter, choose their words more carefully, and follow the rules more closely. For others, it creates pressure that leads to mistakes or rebellion. In either case, the presence of an observer becomes part of the environment, shaping outcomes. If the watchers running Earth's test are aware of this, they might have designed the observation in a way that's neither completely hidden nor completely obvious, and just enough for us to suspect without being certain. Uncertainty is powerful. If you know for sure you're being watched, your behavior might become calculated, even artificial. If you know for sure you're not being watched, you might relax in ways that reveal different aspects of yourself. But if you're not sure, you exist in a constant state of quiet calibration. Every action carries the question, what if this is being seen? That mental state could be exactly what the test is designed to produce, because it forces you to choose between acting from principle and acting for appearance. In our own systems, we see versions of this everywhere. Security cameras in public spaces reduce certain crimes, not necessarily because they catch offenders in the act, but because the possibility of being recorded alters decision-making. Performance reviews at work, teacher evaluations in schools, even the presence of a parent or friend in the room all change behaviour in ways that may not match what happens when no one is watching. The watchers, if they're real, would likely understand this and exploit it, using observation as both a measurement tool and a variable in the test itself. It's worth noting that observation doesn't always come from above. Humans watch each other constantly, and this peer-level surveillance is one of the most effective behavioural regulators we have. Social norms, reputations, and the desire for approval keep many people in line without formal enforcement. The watchers might count on this, knowing that even without direct interference, our awareness of being seen by each other will influence our moral and practical decisions. In that sense, they could set up the environment, release us into it, and let us police ourselves, all while they watch from a distance. But if the point is to measure authenticity, then observation creates a problem. It's hard to know whether someone's actions are genuine or just a performance. The solution might be selective observation. If the watchers can see everything, they can choose when to reveal their presence and when to stay hidden. In moments when they want to see natural behaviour, they might ensure we feel unwatched. In moments when they want to see how we perform under scrutiny, they might make us aware subtly through signs, symbols, or anomalies that trigger a sense of being monitored. It's possible that some of those moments have already happened in your life. Any times when you've suddenly felt the hairs on your neck rise or sensed you were being looked at without visible evidence. Times when a coincidence felt too precise, as if it were placed there to see how you'd react. In a purely random world, those are just quirks of perception. In a test, they could be moments when the watchers lean in to take a closer look. If that's the case, then the observer effect isn't just a side phenomenon. It's an active tool in shaping and measuring us, and it might not always push us toward the same kinds of choices. Sometimes knowing you're being watched encourages pro-social behaviour, kindness, generosity, honesty. Other times, it provokes defensiveness, secrecy, or defiance. The watchers might be less interested in whether observation improves or worsens behaviour, and more interested in which direction different people lean. The ratio between those responses could be one of the key statistics they're tracking. We should also consider that observation might not always be about the present. If the watchers can see our history, not just what we're doing now, but everything we've ever done, then the observer effect could extend backward. The knowledge that actions leave a permanent record can shape decisions even when no one is visibly paying attention. Humans do this with laws and archives. The watchers could do it with something far more precise, a perfect memory of every moment in the test. In that case, the scorecard we talked about earlier wouldn't be an abstraction. It would be a literal record, impossible to erase or alter. There's a strange comfort and discomfort in that idea. On one hand, it means nothing is truly lost. Every good act, every effort, every moment of courage is preserved, even if it went unnoticed by other humans. On the other hand, it means every mistake, every lapse, every selfish choice is also there, recorded without the possibility of forgetting. Whether that feels inspiring or oppressive might say something about how we'd respond if we knew for certain we were being observed in this way. Observation could also be layered. Perhaps the watchers aren't the only observers. There could be multiple groups, higher intelligences, different civilizations, even future versions of ourselves, each with their own reasons for watching. Some might be interested in morality, others in technology, others in resilience. This overlapping observation could create a complex set of influences, each affecting the test in subtle ways. From our perspective, it would just feel like life with its mix of coincidences, challenges, and moments of unexplained clarity. If the observer effect is built into the test, then it might explain certain patterns in human behaviour that otherwise seem puzzling. Why do people sometimes behave better in public than in private? Why do revolutions in behaviour often happen in times of increased communication and visibility? Why do we put so much effort into storytelling, art and record keeping, even when survival is at stake? Perhaps on some deep level, we've evolved with the assumption that we are seen not just by each other, but by something larger. This assumption could also be one of the Watcher's tools for measurement. If they've designed the test well, then the question of whether we're observed becomes less important than how we act under the belief that we might be. That belief shapes cultures, religions, laws, and personal ethics. It creates systems of accountability that persist even when no physical watcher is present. And in doing so, it reveals the balance between our internal and external motivations. The observer effect in a test environment might also work in reverse. Sometimes the watchers might want to see what happens when observation is removed. What do people do when they believe they're truly alone, with no witnesses and no consequences? Those moments can be revealing not because they show our best selves, but because they strip away performance and expose what remains. In that sense, the absence of observation can be just as valuable a data point as its presence. It's possible that the watchers alternate between these modes, periods of visible or suspected observation, and periods of complete invisibility. This would allow them to compare how we behave under different conditions, building a richer understanding of our nature. The transitions between these modes might be marked by events that feel random to us, sudden bursts of attention on certain issues followed by long stretches of neglect. From their perspective, these could be deliberate cycles in the experiment. If all of this is true, then the observer effect isn't just a quirk of human psychology. It's a central part of the environment we live in. It shapes our culture, our choices, and our self-image, even when we're not consciously aware of it. It's a silent force pulling and pushing us toward different behaviours depending on the circumstances. And if the watchers have been running this for a long time, they might be able to predict our reactions with unsettling accuracy, just by adjusting the level and type of observation. Which leads to another possibility, that observation isn't just about watching us, but about teaching us to watch ourselves. Over time, we may internalize the presence of the watcher to the point where we no longer need them. We become our own observer, our own evaluator, our own guide. If that's part of the test, then the end goal might be for us to live as if we're always observed, not because we fear judgment, but because we've learned to hold ourselves to the standard we believe is right. And if we ever reach that point, it could be the moment when the watchers step back entirely, knowing the test has run its course. Not because they've stopped caring, but because we've learned to carry the essence of observation within ourselves. That possibility alone might be the bridge into the next part of the test, the one where it no longer matters whether someone is watching, because the decisions we make come from a place that no observer, however powerful, can alter. Whether or not this really is a test, the thought changes the way you move through life. It's one of those ideas that's difficult to unsee once you've considered it seriously. It gets under the surface of daily choices, the way you speak to someone who can't help you, the effort you put into a task no one is checking, the reaction you have to a small moment of unfairness, even if no watcher exists. Imagining one changes your internal posture toward the world. Some people already live this way without calling it a test. They work by principles that assume their actions matter beyond the immediate. For them, the concept of being evaluated isn't tied to a supernatural figure or a hidden observer or a cosmic purpose. It's a commitment to their own standards. Whether they believe in karma, fate, divine judgment, or nothing at all, they act as if their behaviour ripples outward in ways that can't be fully measured in the moment. If the test is real, those people might be the ones scoring highest without even trying to play the game. If it's not real, they've still built lives with meaning, purpose, and integrity. which are rewards in themselves. This is one of the strange comforts of the idea. If you act as if you're in a test, the benefits appear whether or not the test exists. You either pass something cosmic you can't prove, or you leave behind a trail of actions that improve the lives of others. In either case, you lose nothing by behaving as though it matters. But there's also a tension in it. The belief that life might be a test can sharpen focus and responsibility, but it can also create anxiety. For some, it feels motivating to imagine they're accountable to something bigger than themselves. For others, it feels like a weight, the pressure of constant evaluation, the fear of making a wrong move in a game they didn't sign up to play. This mix of feelings might be part of why the test theory isn't more widely embraced. It offers comfort to some and discomfort to others, often in equal measure. The way this idea lands often depends on personal experience. Someone who's faced injustice might resist the thought of a test because it implies someone set the obstacles on purpose. Someone who's overcome incredible odds might find reassurance in it, as if their struggle had meaning beyond survival. In either case, the idea functions like a lens. It doesn't change the facts of life, but it changes how those facts are interpreted. If the test isn't real, that doesn't make the lens useless. Belief systems, even when unprovable, often work because of the behaviors they inspire, not because of their literal truth. A person who believes in an afterlife might be more generous, not because there's proof of reward, but because the belief makes generosity feel more urgent. A person who believes in fate might take risks they wouldn't otherwise take, which in turn changes the trajectory of their life. In this way, what if Earth is a test works whether it's fact or fiction. It's the behavior it prompts that matters. We see this in history. Societies that believe they're accountable to gods, ancestors, or future generations often create systems of ethics and cooperation that outlast the original belief. Even when the details of the belief fade, the habits remain. A culture might no longer think its harvest depends on a ritual, but it still gathers to share food and support one another because the practice has proven valuable in itself. The test idea could work the same way. Even if future generations reject the premise, the behaviors it shaped could survive. There's also the possibility that the test, real or not, operates best when people don't know which it is. If you knew for certain it was real, you might focus entirely on optimizing for the score, which could lead to shallow or manipulative actions. If you knew for certain it wasn't real, you might dismiss behaviors that have value only in the long term. Uncertainty keeps both possibilities alive, allowing the behaviors to flourish without collapsing into cynicism or calculation. Even in the absence of proof, the question creates a kind of quiet accountability. Imagine waking up each day with two possible truths in mind. Either no one is watching and the meaning you make is the only meaning that exists, or someone is watching and your choices are part of something larger. In both scenarios, your actions still shape the immediate reality for yourself and the people around you. The difference is only in the scope of the ripple effect. Living as if it's a test can also sharpen your awareness of moments that matter. It draws attention to situations that might otherwise pass unnoticed. The decision to speak up when something's wrong, to offer help when it's inconvenient, to listen when you'd rather talk. In the framework of the test, these aren't just personal victories, they're opportunities to demonstrate growth, resilience, and empathy. Whether anyone is measuring them doesn't change the fact that they add weight to the kind of person you become. One challenge is that the test idea can be misused. History is full of examples where belief in a divine or cosmic evaluation has been used to control behavior, enforce conformity, or punish dissent. The difference between a healthy version of the belief and a harmful one often comes down to whether it encourages personal responsibility or demands blind obedience. A test worth passing should measure qualities that improve life for everyone involved, not just compliance with arbitrary rules. That's why, even if the test is real, it's important to examine the source of the rules you follow. If the watchers exist, they may not care whether you follow every tradition or ritual humans have invented. They may care more about whether you've learned to think critically, to question harmful systems, and to act with integrity even when it costs you. Blind obedience might be as much a sign of failure as selfish rebellion, because it suggests you've outsourced your moral judgment instead of developing it. It's also worth considering that if the test exists, its criteria might be simpler than we imagine. Humans have a tendency to complicate things, to create long lists of requirements, rituals, and formalities that may have nothing to do with the original goal. The real test might be as basic as, do you help when you can? Do you harm less than you could? And do you learn from the times you fail? If those are the measures, then the question of whether the test is real becomes less urgent, because those are good practices regardless. In any case, the most interesting part of the question might be its effect on perspective. When you think of life as a test, even temporarily, it becomes easier to see patterns that could otherwise seem random. The challenges you've faced, the people you've met, the turning points in your life. In a random world, they're just events. In a test world, they're placements designed to measure something specific. The difference is subtle but powerful, because it can shift frustration into patience and confusion into curiosity. Even if you ultimately reject the idea, the act of considering it can open up new ways of thinking about your place in the world. It can encourage you to reflect on the values you live by, to pay more attention to the impact you have, and to question whether your daily actions align with the kind of outcome you'd want if someone were keeping score. It can also remind you that many of the traits we value, patience, courage, kindness, are most visible in moments that feel like tests, whether or not they are. And perhaps that's the point. Maybe the truth about the test isn't meant to be known, and maybe its greatest value lies in the way it shapes our thinking and behaviour simply by being possible. In that sense, the question is less about what's out there watching us, and more about what's in here guiding us. Whether the test is an external reality or an internal construct, the effect is the same. It nudges us toward a version of ourselves we might not reach otherwise. The last step in this line of thought is to return to the personal. Whether or not the test exists, you still wake up each day and choose how to move through the world. You still interact with others in ways that either build or erode trust, kindness, and cooperation. You still face moments that feel like turning points, even if they don't show up on any scoreboard. The question of the test doesn't remove the weight of those choices. If anything, it adds to it. And so, the possibility remains hovering just out of reach, shaping decisions without forcing them, asking without answering. That's what makes it powerful. You don't need to prove it to live as if it's true. You just need to decide whether the version of yourself who acts as though it matters is the version you want to be. Wherever you happen to be right now, maybe you're at home, maybe you're travelling, maybe you're in a place you've been for years or a place you just arrived in. This whole thought experiment has been about something that stretches beyond location. It's not just about where you are, but about what you do with the space and time you have. Whether or not Earth really is a test, you're already moving through something that feels like one in its own way. And unlike most tests, this one doesn't have a set schedule, and are no clear instructions at the top of the page and no announcement that it's over. You only find out it's ended when you realise you're somewhere else entirely. You might be listening to this late at night when the world is quieter and it's easier to think about big, strange questions without distraction. Or maybe it's the middle of the day and this has been playing in the background while you do other things, and now you find yourself paying closer attention. That's one of the things about an idea like this. It doesn't really leave when the words stop. It follows you into the rest of your day, waiting for a quiet moment to rise back to the surface. If it's true that we're in some kind of test, then every single moment you've had so far has been part of it. Not just the obvious moments, the big choices, the dramatic events, but the quiet, unremarkable ones too. The way you've spoken to people you thought didn't matter to your future, the way you've handled frustration when no one was there to see it, the way you've treated yourself when you've made a mistake. These are all entries in whatever scorebook might exist, written down in the kind of ink that doesn't fade. And if it isn't a test, if this is all just the product of nature, chance, and the strange rules of the universe, then none of those things stop being important. You still have to decide how to handle other people, how to react to difficulty, how to treat yourself. The difference is only in the framing, and framing changes how we carry the weight. A test gives it structure, but even without the structure, the weight is still there, it's just less organised. That's why the idea works as a lens even for those who don't believe it literally. If you choose to look through it, you'll start seeing things differently. You'll notice patterns in events that used to feel random. You'll start to think about whether challenges have a purpose. You'll catch yourself wondering if certain moments are meant to show you something about yourself. Whether or not there's a higher intelligence behind it, the shift in perspective changes your relationship with the world. Sometimes it's tempting to imagine the test, if it exists, as something grand, a massive, complex experiment with sophisticated technology or divine insight behind it. Other times, it's more useful to imagine it as simple, a way of seeing whether beings like us can live together without destroying each other, whether we can build something worth passing on, whether we can improve in ways that make survival more than just persistence. A grand test is exciting to imagine, but a simple one is often harder to pass. The truth is, you won't get a score at the end that you can compare to someone else's. There's no official announcement, no ceremony, no written feedback. Whatever happens after this stage, if anything happens, will be shaped by everything you've done and become. But you won't see the results in the way you're used to with other kinds of tests. You'll only see the next step. By then, the part you're in now will be over. That's part of why it's worth paying attention now. If you wait for confirmation before you start acting as if it matters, you may run out of time. It's like waiting to start studying until you've seen the final exam. By then, you've already missed all the chances to learn in the process. If this is a test, the test is happening every day, whether you believe in it or not. And maybe the point isn't to convince you that it's real. Maybe the point is to remind you that acting as though it's real gives you something to aim toward, something to measure yourself against that isn't about money, status, or survival alone. It's about the qualities that last beyond those things, the ones that, if there's anything beyond this life, might actually matter there too. It's strange to think that something so enormous could be happening without most people noticing. But if you've been with this thought for a while now, you've already noticed more than most. You've considered the possibility that life is being observed, that your choices are part of something bigger, that the details of your existence are more than just random noise. Even if you decide you don't believe it, that consideration has already changed you in some way. And now the question becomes, what will you do with that change? Will you carry it into tomorrow, into next week, into the years ahead? Will you let it guide you in moments when it would be easier to look away? When doing the right thing would cost more than doing the easy thing? Will you remember it when no one is watching or when you think no one is? If this really is a test, then the watchers, whoever or whatever they are, will see that answer in your actions. If it's not, then the people around you will. Either way, the outcome is shaped by the same things: what you choose, what you build, what you leave behind. So wherever you are right now, morning, evening, a busy street, a quiet room, you're still in it. The time is still running. The next moment is still yours to shape, and whether there's an end score waiting for you or not, you still get to decide how you want to be remembered and what kind of mark you'll leave on the place you've been given. That's the kind of question that keeps unfolding long after the conversation ends. And if you found it worth thinking about, then you already know the next part is yours to write.